Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our October edition of Rights at Night. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher and the current president of the Georgia Association of Educators. And we have with us this evening Joe Fleming, our Director of Government Relations. And we will be talking this evening about school system waivers and charter school systems. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. We've got a little smaller group this evening, or just raise your hand and we'll call on you. And hope you learn a lot that you can share with your colleagues. So, Joe, I will turn it over to you.
Terrific. Let's see. There we are. Can you see that, Lisa?
Yes, now I can.
So I don't know if you want to lead and I'll follow, or we can just kind of walk through these together.
Yep, that'll work.
But we're here to talk about what we call school system waivers. And if you're not familiar with this, it's probably the bane of your existence, even if you don't know about it. We have a peculiar situation in Georgia where local school boards can determine for themselves which state laws they wish to abide by and which they wish to ignore. And we'll talk about that, about how we got here and what the impact is on our teachers and educators and on our students. So what are school system waivers? Essentially, these are exemptions that school boards get for their school systems to literally ignore any part of Title 20 in Georgia law. Title 20 is the section of Georgia law that deals with public education. So as you'll see as we go through just a handful of these slides, there are any number of different laws that school systems request a waiver for and are always granted. For example, you may not know that we have a state law in Georgia that limits the size of classes. If memory serves correctly, for a typical math or English class, I believe the maximum is 35 students. It varies. Of course, band classes can be much higher, but special education classes should be much lower. But a school district need only ask the state school board for a waiver from the class size law, and poof, they don't have to abide by any class law that exists in the state of Georgia. So if you wonder why during COVID and maybe even now, why your class has so many students in it beyond what is even manageable, it's because the legislators created a mechanism where school districts don't have to follow the class size laws. Lisa, I believe that 99.999% of all schools in Georgia have no obligation to follow the state law on class sizes. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that is a false indicator and certainly obviously not good for our students as well. Many school districts waive minimum teacher salaries, meaning that they don't have to abide by the state salary schedule. They can pay you less than the state salary schedule if they have a waiver for that. Some school districts have waivers so that they don't have to hire certified educators. Some have waived fair dismissal rights that give you due process if you're accused of something by your employer. And some have waivers for duty-free lunch in the lower grades. But that's not it. They also waive laws pertaining to gifted students, to remedial students, to students for whom English is a second language. And usually it seems like they do these to, again, pack more kids into a class, freeing them up to spend money on other things that they want to spend it on and not have to hire additional teachers for those classes. So I can't think of anything more nefarious than using waivers to pack in more students in remedial classes or ESOL type classes. But then there's the big kicker, and the thing that opens up the entire code section on public education. They can apply for waivers for anything else that's in the state laws on public education, and they do. Oops, I don't know what happened to my screen.
I switched it, Joe, because yours was showing the notes, and I'm going to
Oh,
get rid of the notes if that's okay with you.
yeah. Are you running the show now?
Yep, I stole it from you.
That's fun. Sorry about that.
That's okay. One of the things I think we need to interject here, because I know we do have some members who are here this evening who work in charter school systems. If if a district chose to be a charter system, they have a blanket waiver. That means they didn't even have to fill out the paperwork and say, we want to be waived and specify what they wanted the waiver for. They have a waiver from everything. And so, for those of you who are working in charter systems, that's one of the things your local needs to be working on, because fair dismissal was waived. No matter how long you've taught in that district, the charter has waived fair dismissal. GAE still has a lawsuit pending about that, which we have won, saying that if you had earned fair dismissal prior to 2015 or whatever date your system became a charter system, you retain those rights. But of course, the system that lost that suit is appealing it to the Georgia Supreme Court. So there is one charter system in the state that our educators have their fair dismissal rights, and that is Clark County, because the members in Clark County worked with their school board, and the school board passed a local fair dismissal policy since they had waived the state law.
So, Lisa, hearing you talk reminds me of something you said before about waivers, and that is that essentially school boards have a veto power over the legislative process. So you have a bill that goes through hearings in the House Education Committee, the Senate Education Committee. It passes both chambers. The governor signs it in, and it doesn't really matter, unfortunately. I would think if I were a legislator, I couldn't abide by that situation. But here we have a situation where we've got these waivers. You go to the next one. And we talked about some of the other things that are waived as well.
And one of the things I think we need to point out, the law says they are being granted these waivers in order to increase student achievement.
And that's coming up in a second too.
Okay, that's coming up in a second. So just looking at these students here on this slide, gifted students, at-risk students, early intervention, English as second language learners, how can waiving the requirements for these programs for children who need additional instruction and support, how is that going to increase student achievement?
Yeah, and Lisa, and I think one of the slides may talk about it as well. This whole concept of waivers began during the Great Recession in the mid 2000s, and it was initially given for financial flexibility. If you've been an educator for a while, you'll remember furloughs during that time. And at that point in time, they wanted to give schools maximum flexibility. Today, as you just suggested, the way the law is written, these waivers are supposed to be given in a contract setting in exchange for proof that there's academic progress. Again, that slide coming up, but how in the world can you say putting more kids in a remedial class or ignoring class size waivers, class size laws, in any way could possibly contribute to the academic progress or scholastic achievement of our students. So this slide kind of talks about that a little bit. Lisa, you're good at giving the history on the IE squared and how we got there to strategic waivers. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that last line is exactly what the law says. The goal of each waiver shall be the improvement of student performance. And again, the ones that we've talked about, you can't make an argument about fair dismissal. You can't make an argument about class size. You can't make an argument about any of these waivers. When there's even a waiver for bus safety laws that are, I mean, why would you do that? Well, again, it started out financial, and the truth is they can say it's about academic performance all they want, but it's about the schools wanting the ability to control the tax dollars that they get from the state of Georgia without the interference of the legislative process.
Yeah, and so yeah, Joe, IE squared stands, which is what that IE2 is. Prior to 2015, Governor Deal appointed a blue ribbon commission that was going to study education funding in Georgia. And the report they produced after going all across the state, talking to educators, talking to parents, talking to students, talking to community members, was investing in educational excellence. So that's where the E2 comes in. And basically, this Blue Ribbon Commission came back and said, we don't have enough money to fund public education as we should, and the funding that public education needs. So we will give this report investing in educational excellence. And since we don't have the funds to invest, then we will allow a system to get the same amount of funding. But if they want to be innovative in how they spend that funding and not have to follow the letter of the law, we'll see if that will help. There was one school system that signed on to IE squared, and that was the Gwinnett County school system. And literally 1 year after they started, so we all know public education, 1 year is never long enough to know if something's going to work. But 1 year after it started, they passed the original law that said every school system would have to either become a charter system, an IE squared, or remain at that point, they said status quo. This was supposed to happen in 2012. They pushed it off to 2013, to 2014, and in 2015, when they renamed it Strategic Waiver School Systems, that set the deadline of June 30th, 2016, when all systems had to have made the choice. So if you were an educator then, the systems were required to get public input on the choice they made. And it's interesting that that input was required when they made the choice. But now, once they made the choice, they can amend and add new waivers at any time, and there's no public input required. So the community has been completely locked out of this process. And that's my history lesson.
Excellent.
Okay, here's our map. We currently have 48 charter systems, 130 strategic waiver systems, and 2 Title 20 no waiver school systems. And Joe, you were right. It is Webster.
Okay.
It is Webster. I keep wanting to do mental. It is Webster County and Beaufort City are the only 2 systems in the state who do not have charter, or waiver.
So Pamela asked a good question in the chat about how, and we can find out about what our individual school systems, what they're doing in this area. And we'll just a couple more slides and we'll be finished, and we'll take some questions like that and try to point you in the right direction. You want to move to the next one real quickly?
Yes. For some reason, Joe, I can't see the chat, so.
So Lisa talked a few minutes ago. These waivers are supposed to be given in the insurance and proof that there is somehow academic progress or student academic achievement there. So here's how they do that. And this will be interesting coming up when some of these waivers are scheduled to expire. It's really going to be interesting to watch school districts show that class size waivers suddenly have resulted in a spike in standardized testing or graduation rates. But all they have to do to meet the criteria is show improvement in one of these. They can show complete abject failure in the other three categories, but as long as they've got one more student in an AP class, they're good to go. Meanwhile, their graduation rates could have fallen off the charts. The SAT or ACT scores are down. No improvement in standardized tests. But again, they just enroll one more kid in an AP type class, honors class, that according to what I read, satisfies their requirement and justifies, unfortunately, the keeping of that waiver. So that's important to know how low the threshold is for proving you're actually improving the lives of students with these waivers. And I think one more slide, maybe two.
Oh, maybe. Sorry, it didn't move. There we go.
So this has been going on for a while now. Again, it's written into law that the current waiver system is designed to encourage a highly rigorous curriculum and to encompass content standards in public schools statewide. Again, I have no idea how anybody in their right mind can make an argument that any of the waivers that we've talked about here would contribute to a highly rigorous curriculum. I think that's the slides. Pamela, your question is a really, really good question. The fix. Aha, you're right. So there is a fix, and it's a GAE-backed bill introduced by Senator Nabila Islam. She's a senator from Gwinnett County. And we felt like it was important to maybe take on the 7 most egregious waivers or the 7 easiest to understand. When we talk about waivers to our members, our GAE members, and when we talk about waivers to legislators, it takes 2 or 3 conversations before they actually believe what we're saying is true, and that they can wrap their heads around what actually is going on here. So while we'd love to eliminate waivers altogether, we picked 7 areas where the bill that Senator Islam is sponsoring would do away with those. In class size, there are a few years ago, the General Assembly overwhelmingly passed a law to require physical education. The governor vetoed that. It came back 2 years ago now. So there's a requirement in state law of 30 minutes of physical activity a day, but it can be waived, and probably already has been. Should check on that. These expenditure control waivers are so important because you probably, if you're a classroom teacher, have gotten a raise in the last couple of years. There's a $2,000 raise in the pipeline now if you've not already received it. Your school district doesn't even have to give that to you. The General Assembly appropriated that money for the purpose of giving you a pay raise, a permanent increase in the state salary schedule. But if they wanted to spend it on tulip gardens at the central office, they could do that if they have an expenditure control waiver or they're a charter system. We talked about the requirement for certified teachers. They can waive, as I said, and they go below, if they wish, the state salary schedule, duty-free lunch, and fair dismissal. So there is a fix. And one of the purposes of this call is to, one, familiarize you with the issue, but also begin talking to your colleagues about the problem and the fix. And we are trying to build momentum to get a bill passed. And it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, it still is an issue where people have a hard time believing that this is the situation. You mean a school board can just veto a state law? That isn't, they didn't teach me that in civics class. How does that work? But now that we know it's here and you can see the harmful impact it has on GAE members and on the students that we teach, it's something that we need to begin talking to our colleagues about, whether they're GAE members or not, and then begin branching out and reaching to the legislature to get action taken there. If we could just have a hearing, I think people would wake up and realize the kind of problem that these waivers are creating.
Okay, that's the end. Okay, so I'm going to ask Alicia, I'm going to answer Alicia's question because I can see it. And then Joe, you can tell me the other question. She says, I know that there are waivers for class size, but is there a state limit on a kindergarten class size? I know this answer. Yes, dear, there is. State law says the kindergarten teacher can have 18 students by themselves. If there is a full-time paraprofessional, that number goes up to 20. I'm sure you have more than that, probably. My last 5 years
Oh my goodness.
in my kindergarten classroom, I averaged 24. I actually had 2 years where I had 28, and that was without a paraprofessional.
And we haven't even talked about how high the class size limits in the law are. I mean, it'd be
Right.
nice to be able to fight
So,
to get them reduced.
for those of you who aren't in kindergarten, I feel Alicia's pain. First through third grade, the limit is supposed to be 21. Fourth through eighth grade, it is supposed to be 26 or 27. And then high school is supposed to have that same limit for core classes. There's a whole chart that shows what the state class size law says, but every district except for Beaufort City and Webster has waived it. I was with one of our UNICEF directors in Valdosta City Schools last year. I'm just going to call them out. And the high school teacher had 39 desks in his classroom or 35 desks in his classroom and 43 students on his roster for that class. And I'm like, how do you do that? And he said, well, the first 35 people that arrive get a desk and the rest sit in a chair around the perimeter of the classroom. Okay, Joe, what's our other question? You're muted, Joe.
You'd think by now.
Yeah.
So Pamela has a question about how she can find out what waivers Cobb County has. And it's a great question. And I wish it were as easy as clicking on Department of Education website in Cobb County and boom, there it is. But it's not so easy, is it, Lisa?
Well, I'm going to show you. So if you can see my screen, the easiest thing, the easiest way to do it, because it is buried on the Department of Education website. If you go to Google or whatever your favorite search engine is and see how it just comes up, Strategic Waiver School System, Georgia, then the very first link that comes up is Strategic Waiver School Systems Partnership, and you click there. and then this under the resources. So the district flexibility options chosen. I'm going to open that in a new tab. I closed a bunch of tabs, so I have already. That gives us the 46, and the numbers have changed from the map we had. 46. Oh, that, yeah. This is as of 1/17/2018. So
Right.
our map is updated. There's Chattahoochee and one other that switched from strategic waiver. So you can see that the Department of Education is not in a hurry to update this. And then, but they did update in September of 2021 the Exhibit B detail list. And this is what I'll move in just a minute and let y'all see my art project on the wall, which has every system and the waivers they have. But most of you are not going to be concerned about every system. You're going to want to see your system. So you click on your system, and since she asked about Cobb, I'll click on Cobb. And it opens you a list of the waivers that the system has chosen. Okay, so you can see Cobb starts class size, direct classroom expenditures, QBE financing, program enrollment and appropriation, category allotments, state salary schedule requirements, certification requirements, English language learner requirements, organization of schools, middle schools, competencies in core curriculum, online learning, graduation requirements, flexibility with funding, flexibility with prerequisite requirements for algebra, flexibility to accept credits from transferring students, flexibility to allow local criteria for promotion retention, flexibility to serve students hospital homebound if medical condition warrants, flexibility to notify parents of student absences through digital tools, and flexibility of school day and year for students and employees. So those are COPs. Every system that has one is here. You can see it gives a date if they are amended. And I'm going to show you all.
Which I'm not sure this list has been updated in a few years.
Well, the detailed list was in 21.
Getting close to 24.
Yeah. I'm going to show you Coweta. And the reason I'm going to show you Coweta is because just like everybody else, they have this great big long list, but their document is much longer. It was revised in 2015. They actually give an example of how they would use the waiver in this situation. So if you're, they're one of, I have not seen a lot of districts that did that. Okay. But it is here. If your system is not a strategic waiver system and is a charter system, I don't know how you find their charter, because they are not listed like this. They may be there somewhere, but I have not been able to find them.
Lisa, there's a request to put this link in the chat as well.
Okay, I will do that. I'm going to stop sharing so I can copy it easier. Okay.
Now, you can help me to remember, is it during the process that a school district is asking for a waiver that the information is supposed to be posted on that school district's website, or is it always supposed to be there?
It was in the process, and it was during the when they were originally choosing what they were asking for had to be posted, and it also that was when they had to have the input from the community and parents.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to look at the questions. We have somebody who's a special ed teacher. How many students to have a second paraprofessional? You're in Chatham. I'm almost sure Chatham is a charter system. So it would be what the system says. That's the other thing I will pull up. Joe's gonna, Joe, next question while I look for that. So what was the draw for the districts who chose to be strategic waiver instead of charter? Why didn't they all choose the blanket waiver? I needed to get that one too. Because of people like GAE, when districts were making this decision, they had to request public input. And our locals, in many cases where we have active, engaged locals, were involved in those public meetings, and the locals were pushing them not to choose the blanket waiver. I personally spoke at all of the DeKalb County meetings, and I can tell you today that our position was they should have no further increase in class size. They should not waive fair dismissal. They should not waive teacher certification, and they should not waive the teacher salary schedule. And the one that they gave us is they did not waive fair dismissal. So, and you also had school boards who rightly saw that if they had the blanket waiver, they were giving up. And the school board was saying, we're not going to follow a law that was passed for the betterment of teaching and learning in our students. And so they chose not to do the blanket waivers.
Ready for a commercial, Lisa?
Sure, why don't you do the commercial while I look for the class size law in my files.
So we're speaking about the Georgia legislature, and it is going to be convening in just a little over 2 months. January 8th, 2024, they'll be back in session. So we've got of the members of the control district, Sydney Powell, somebody.
I got
it. So that's not far away. Lisa and I've already begun meeting with legislators to advance a proactive agenda and beat back some of the negative things that we may think may happen this year. But I wanted to let you know and ask you to mark it on your calendar. GA's 2024 Day at the Capitol. It is going to be February 22nd. That's a Thursday. Last year, we had a record number of folks attend, and it's so important to show numbers and also to branch out and lobby our legislators, and this is a great opportunity to do that. So we'll probably kick things off about 8 a.m. We meet in a building called the Sloppy Floyd Building, which is catty corner from the Capitol downtown. We usually go to about 2 o'clock, maybe a little longer. But during that time, you'll hear updates on what's going on legislatively. You'll have an opportunity to meet with your own legislators. And depending on where we are in the session, hopefully advocate for some bills that we're supporting and maybe take time to convince legislators to vote against some that we may be opposing. So again, that's February, and I'll even type this in here, 22nd, 2024. And that is a Thursday. The link, I believe, is live that I just posted a little bit before this. So you can go ahead and sign up. And we hope to have a new record number of folks down there. Lisa shared with us her plans about occupying 2 rooms up there this year. So I know we're hoping and planning for a big event. And again, the turnout, the volume, the quality of contact, it's all so important. there's a limit to what Joe and Lisa can do at the state capitol. There is no substitute for a constituent and an educated constituent speaking with their legislator. So please be a part of our legislative army and join us that day at the Capitol.
Okay, so what I have for you all, and I hope this will work, I'm going to send you a link to the state class size law, which gives what our districts are supposed to follow. Okay, and it is going to put that link in the chat. And then there's the law, and it gives what the class size is supposed to be for grade levels, all the exceptionalities, the maximum individual class size, and how many can be added if you add a paraprofessional. It also gives gifted and alternative programs. This has everything you could think of. But the other thing you should know is that up through 2014, because of the recession, districts each year were passing resolutions, the school boards were passing resolutions saying what their class size was going to be for that year. So before they got the waiver, they each year had to individually apply for a class size waiver. Don't ask me why, but I have that document from 2014. It is a 40-page document, and it lists every school system. I am going to attempt, it's a PDF, I am going to attempt to drop this document in the chat for you, and then you can save it. The name of it is Class Size Resolutions FY14. So that would have been 10 years ago, and this was before they got the strategic waivers and the charter systems. So if you look in the chat and you click on that file, you may be able to download it. Are there specific questions we can ask the district to have them produce actual statistical data to show how the waivers are beneficial? The Governor's Office of Student Achievement is who is tasked with judging whether the waiver had a positive or negative impact. All the waiver contracts and the charter contracts were set to expire in 2022. In fall of 2021, or the summer right before school started, the Department of Education said, because of the pandemic, we don't have reliable data and reliable milestone scores, which is what they were going to use to do this evaluation. So they were planning to extend the blanket waiver to all systems. We started asking questions, and what they did instead was extend them all 2 years. So this year's the year that we will find out how they intend to try to justify continuing the waivers and saying that they are beneficial. Duty-free lunch. Okay, if your system has waived duty-free lunch, then they have waived the law, and a great many systems waived duty-free lunch. If this if our bill that Senator Islam has submitted, it would eliminate the ability of a system to waive duty-free lunch. So systems would have to comply with the law and provide educators duty-free lunch every day. Although the law did have a thing in there that by mutual agreement, you could lose your duty-free lunch. They were looking at, for example, when I take my students on a field trip, I do not get my 30 minutes of duty-free lunch that day. So the grade level and the principal could agree that on the field trip days when we don't get our duty-free lunch, that we could leave when the children leave and get our 30 minutes at the end of the day. And that provision was in there. So S Bill 268, right, Joe? Okay. So that bill would say, no, you can't waive duty-free lunch. You can't waive class size. You're going to have to follow these laws.
268, yep.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else have questions? Okay. And I would encourage you, as you're learning more about this, look at what your system is doing. And I would also say, don't try to print out that Excel sheet that shows all the systems, because it's a 25-page document. And I sat here for about 2 hours with scissors and taping it back together to be able to see everything. It's on my wall, but I'm like, well, if I lean this way, y'all see that poster back there with that's kind of this purple on my wall? That is all of the waivers that all of the systems have. So you can see it is quite big. And it's teeny tiny print if you want to see the things. Okay. All right. Check and see if there's any more questions. If not, I am certain that we can all use the gift of ending about 13 minutes early, because I know you all were in your classrooms today. And I want to thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for what you do every day for our students. Thank you for being a member of GAE. And I wish you all a happy and good evening. And Joe, thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a good evening.